Help anyone, please. The words are a dry, cracked whisper, almost lost in the dust of a lonely road. In a ditch, a man lies broken, his breathing shallow, his body a map of someone else's cruelty. He looks up, a flicker of hope in his swollen eyes, as he hears footsteps. A figure approaches, a respectable man, a pillar of the community. The figure sees him, pauses for a cold moment, and then deliberately crosses to the other side of the road and keeps walking, his shadow shrinking into the distance. He was left to die. The very people he was taught to respect, the leaders of his own faith, saw him suffering and did nothing. But his story doesn't end there. In that dusty ditch, it ends with an act of love so profound it would echo for thousands of years, an act of mercy from the one person in the world he'd been taught to hate. Our story starts on one of the most dangerous roads in the ancient world, the path from Jerusalem down to Jericho. And this was no leisurely stroll. It was a steep 17-mile descent, dropping over 3,000 feet through a barren, rocky wilderness. The landscape itself was hostile. It was a maze of cliffs and ravines that gave perfect cover to the robbers who earned the route its terrifying nickname, the Bloody Pass. To travel this road alone was a gamble with your life. The man at the heart of our story was an ordinary guy, maybe a merchant or a pilgrim, making this very journey. He was just like us, focused on getting where he was going, probably thinking about his own life, his own worries, his own plans. He knew the road was risky, but like so many of us, he probably thought, it won't happen to me. He had no idea that in just a few hours, his simple trip would become a brutal lesson in the true nature of humanity. He was about to find out who his neighbor really was, and the answer would change the world forever. As he made his way down the winding path, the desert silence was shattered. They came out of nowhere, shadows detaching themselves from the rocks. Thieves, and they were ruthless. They swarmed him, giving him no time to react. This wasn't just a robbery, it was a savage attack. They stripped him of everything, his money, his belongings, even the clothes off his back, leaving him utterly humiliated. But they didn't stop there. They beat him again and again with a brutality that was completely unnecessary. They unleashed a torrent of violence until he was silent, not because he gave up, but because he was unconscious. They left him half dead on the side of the road, a broken man on the edge of life itself. He was completely alone, helpless, and at the mercy of the next person to walk that bloody path. As the sun beat down, his life began to fade. All he could do was wait. Soon enough, the sound of footsteps, a faint hope stirred. The man managed to lift his head and saw who was coming. It was a priest, a man of God, a servant of the temple in Jerusalem, basically the highest moral authority in his entire culture. Surely this was salvation. This was a professional holy man, someone whose whole life was supposed to be about showing God's mercy on earth. The priest got closer. He saw the mangled figure in the ditch. There was no mistaking the man's suffering. It was raw and right in front of him. The beaten man waited for a hand to reach out, a word of comfort. It never came. The priest stopped, looked, and then, in a calculated move, gathered his robes, moved to the opposite side of the road, and passed by without even breaking his stride. Why? Well, maybe he was afraid the man was dead, and touching a corpse would make him ritually unclean for his temple duties. His religious rules became an excuse to ignore his basic humanity. His piety was a shield, not a bridge. A little while later, another traveler. This time, it was a Levite, another important religious figure, a temple assistant steeped in the law and the scriptures. Here was a second chance. The Levite walked right up to the spot, stopped, and looked down at the bleeding man. He saw the same broken body, the same desperate need, and he made the exact same choice. He too crossed over and continued on his way. The two men who should have been heroes, the religious elites, the symbols of faith, completely failed the test. They saw human suffering as an inconvenience, a mess to be avoided, not a call to be answered. The man in the ditch was now twice abandoned, his hope bleeding out into the dust. The silence returned, heavier and more hopeless than before. As the minutes stretched on, a third traveler approached. By now, the wounded man probably expected nothing. If the holy men from his own people wouldn't help him, why would anyone else? The figure that came into view was a Samaritan. Now, to get the earth shattering power of this moment, you have to understand the world these men lived in. The man on the ground was a Jew. The man walking toward him was a Samaritan. And to put it simply, Jews and Samaritans despised each other. Their hatred was ancient, deep, and bitter. Centuries earlier, the Samaritans who remained in the northern kingdom of Israel had intermarried with foreign people. In the eyes of the Jews, this made them racially and religiously impure, half breeds. They had their own version of the scriptures and their own holy mountain, Mount Gerizim, where they insisted the true worship of God should happen, a direct defiance of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. The hostility was so bad that they usually avoided traveling through each other's lands at all. For a Jew, a Samaritan wasn't just a stranger, he was a heretic, an enemy, the villain of the story. The beaten man would have seen him not as a savior, but as a final threat. The audience hearing this story for the first time would have been holding their breath, expecting the Samaritan to mock him, or worse, what happened next was unthinkable. The Samaritan saw the Jewish man, bloody and helpless in the ditch, but he didn't see a Jew. He didn't see an enemy. He saw a human being in agony, and the story tells us he was moved with compassion. This wasn't just a flicker of pity, it was a deep, gut level empathy that demanded he do something now. While the priest and the Levite kept their distance to stay pure, the Samaritan knelt in the dirt and got his hands dirty. He went right to him and began to gently clean his wounds, using his own oil and wine, which were common ancient remedies to disinfect and soothe pain. He carefully bandaged the man's injuries. Then he made an even bigger sacrifice. The Samaritan lifted the wounded man onto his own animal, his only way of getting around. This meant the Samaritan himself now had to walk the rest of that grueling, dangerous road on foot. He didn't just offer what was easy, he took the man's burden onto himself. He brought him slowly and carefully to a nearby inn, a safe haven from the road. His compassion wasn't for show, it was a profound, personal, and costly act of love. The Samaritan's mercy didn't stop there. This wasn't a one time good deed. He stayed with the wounded man through the night, personally looking after him, making sure he was stable and safe. He didn't just drop him off and run, he took full responsibility for his recovery. The next morning, the Samaritan got ready to leave. He went to the innkeeper, reached into his purse, and pulled out 2 denarii. That was about 2 full days' wages for a laborer, a serious amount of money. He handed it to the innkeeper and said, "Take care of him." But then he said something truly extraordinary. He made a promise that shows the incredible depth of his generosity. "Whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I return." This was a blank check for compassion. He was guaranteeing the man's complete recovery, no matter the cost. He wasn't just paying for a room for the night, he was investing in a stranger's future, the life of a man he was supposed to hate. He expected nothing in return. His love had no limits and no boundaries. This entire story was first told by Jesus to answer one single question from a religious lawyer: and who is my neighbor? The lawyer was trying to draw a line in the sand, to define exactly who he was obligated to love, and more importantly, who he was allowed to ignore. After telling the story, Jesus flipped the question back on him. Which of these three do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the thieves? The answer was painfully obvious, but the lawyer couldn't even bring himself to say the word Samaritan. He couldn't name his enemy as the hero. So he muttered, "The one who showed him mercy." With that, Jesus redefined neighbor for all time. Your neighbor isn't just someone who shares your background, your politics, or your religion. A neighbor isn't defined by who they are, but by what you do. The question isn't, who is worthy of my help? The real question is, am I willing to be a neighbor to the person right in front of me who's in need? The Samaritan erased the lines drawn by hatred and replaced them with a bridge built of mercy. This 2,000-year-old story challenges us today just as much as it did then. It forces us to ask, who are my Samaritans? Who are the people we dismiss, judge, or look down on? And who's left bleeding on the side of our own roads? the roads of our busy lives, our social media feeds, and our communities. The story asks us to redefine our neighbor. It's not just the person who looks like you or thinks like you, it's the person in your path who is broken and in need of mercy. It's the person you have every excuse to ignore. So let us know in the comments who has been an unexpected Good Samaritan in your life, a time when help came from the most surprising person or place. We'd love to hear your story. And if this message moved you, please like this video, subscribe for more stories that challenge us, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. The parable of the Good Samaritan is so much more than a nice story. It's a radical call to action. It's a takedown of convenient, comfortable faith and a celebration of costly, active love. It teaches us that true compassion isn't measured by our beliefs, but by our actions when we're face to face with human suffering. The story ends with a simple, powerful command from Jesus that echoes down to us today. He said, "You go and do likewise."